What does the word faith even mean? Why is it so important for Jesus in the Bible? And what does it have to do with miracles? The goal of this podcast is to help people know Jesus through the Bible. Today, we talk about the encounter Jesus has with a desperate father in the book of Mark, chapter 9. Welcome to the Jesus Table Podcast.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the second episode of the Jesus Table Podcast. My name is Elliot Reyna. I am here with Nick Venditti, and today we're going to look at another encounter someone had with Jesus.
Well, Elliot, it's always great to be able to talk about the Lord, isn't it?
Yes.
It's encouraging and you learn so much. I learned so much from all of this. And today, as you mentioned, we are going to be discussing a situation that really a desperate situation. We have the story of a father who found himself totally impotent, and I just think of all those parents out there, mothers, fathers, even grandparents, and all of a sudden they have a loved one, and here the idea is of a son, who they see he's sick, and what do? Sometimes you have the feeling that, well, I wish I could take his place or I could take her place, instead of him or her suffering. But Jesus is just so gracious and so loving and kind. So I'm excited about discussing this today with you.
Yeah, no, that's true. And that's what I think I love about these stories that we see in the Gospels, just real people, real
Yeah.
problems that we face today, and some of them we can relate to. I'm obviously not a father yet, but with my little brothers, I remember them being sick, and it's just the angst of them. You're feeling what's the word? Helpless, and so
Yeah, that's it.
yeah, um, that's what we'll see here with the father. So for those who don't know the story, will be in Mark 9, and there's a lot going on here, but the disciples were trying to help this man. Jesus comes, and the disciples are like, "Hey, we couldn't do it. Help us out." And then Jesus shows up on the scene and does what Jesus does. But there's a lot of things that go on here with what he says to them, what he says to the people around them, and then there's these other people, the scribes, which I've always been confused about who these people are, and I'd love for you to hopefully give us some light on who these people were and why they're antagonistic toward Jesus. So and then we have the father and the boy. So yeah, who do you want to start with here? Do you want to start with the disciples?
Well, boy, I don't know. That's a lot to chew on, really.
Yeah.
Let's start with the scribes because,
All
well,
right.
we discussed about the different people and groups that are here, and of course the scribes. Sometimes we think of them as religious leaders, which they were, but they were much more than that. They were much more than religious leaders. Some of them, some scriptures refer to them as the doctors of the law. They were like lawyers also, and even previous, before their religious nature, to say scribes, what it really means is someone who writes down. So they were very educated, and we see throughout the Bible, in the Old Testament also, scribes existed. They were like recorders. They were like secretaries for
Like
kings.
historians kind of thing, or
Historians also,
okay,
exactly.
okay,
So they were very well educated people. Obviously, they could write, you know. And I like the fact that you mentioned that about historians because a good number of them, previous to the day of Jesus, were with the kings, and they would write down the stories and the battles, and
okay,
they were experts. They were in some of them were what I would consider people with doctorates today.
okay.
They were people that really dedicated their lives to studying, and some of them were followers of Jesus, but others also were antagonistic to Jesus or doubtful of Jesus. And we see a blend of all of that in the Gospels. And here you see, again, that, I don't know, yeah, they were pretty antagonistic towards Jesus, doubting him. And again, Jesus is the hero. And it's not in the sense of the good guy always wins, but it is in the sense that there was so much wisdom behind Jesus, so much love, so much care. that he really, you see how compassionate he was with the Father, when he asked him, do you believe? And what I like about this story also, and it's almost a paradox, I would dare say, that, the man is very honest. He's very transparent. We see his hurt. We see all that he went through. He goes to the disciples and he tells them, hey, guys, do this, please help me. And they try to help him. And obviously the text is very clear that they couldn't do anything. They admitted it themselves. But here we have this man who is desperate, as you had mentioned before. And he comes up to Jesus. And we see how Jesus asks him, do you believe? And again, the man was very honest and transparent. He says, yes. But then he says, help my unbelief. I don't know where you've been, Elliot, in your walk with the Lord, but I know there are those moments that I feel the same exact way as that gentleman.
Yeah. It's so weird that it can both be at the same time, right? You can have like belief, but you can at the same time have this struggle, And that doesn't mean that, oh, therefore I don't have belief at all because I'm struggling or because I have this doubt, but sometimes it's both and, right? It's yes.
Well,
But
here I think
that's,
it is, but that's a good way of putting it.
yeah.
It is both and. Yes, he had faith. Most probably, he had faith because he had heard what Jesus has done. Obviously, he comes to Jesus. But at the same time, it's like I've gone to so many people. I've been in so many situations, and yet nothing has ever happened. So it's sort of that tension, and I struggle with that. And as you mentioned, you struggle, and I think we all do. Sometimes we say, "Yes, Lord, I trust you," but let me help you out, okay? Let me
Hmm.
tell you a little bit how you can do this.
Yeah.
I trust you, Lord. I trust you, Lord. But and I think this is the situation that the gentleman found himself, and of course he was desperate. And I just wonder how many of us have not been desperate in our walks with the Lord. I mean,
Yeah.
tell me one or two situations in your life when you would possibly
Oof.
think that you were desperate and you wanted an answer and you didn't get it, and Lord now, etc.
No,
Can you
yeah.
think of
I mean,
something?
so many. So many. I remember um I mentioned a moment earlier my brother being sick. I remember him having a horrible fever and I was a teenager at the time and I went outside to the backyard. My parents were like in that like do we take him to the hospital? Do we like and they were just like in that little moment just trying to decide and and I felt so helpless and I crying out and then I come back in and then I was like, what happened? Are we gonna take him to the hospital? And they're like, no, the fever's gone. And like seeing God do something about it. And then sometimes I've been moments of my life where I'm praying for something that could seem dumb, but like, where am I gonna go study, God? What do you want me to do in my life? And I feel desperate for an answer, and I don't hear nothing for months or years. And I think I am very grateful sometimes in the aftermath of that situation that
Exactly.
because it drew me closer to him. You know what I mean? I got to know him
Yep.
better because I was so desperate for him because I recognize my need. Whereas sometimes in my day to day life, I'm like, oh, I got this. I'm relying on my own willpower, or strength, or wit, and it's not when something goes wrong that I'm like, God, which shouldn't be the case. We
Right.
should always be like that. But it's sometimes those moments where we can completely see that we're helpless without him. And anyway, I've grown in my relationship with him throughout those circumstances, if that makes sense.
And in our culture, sometimes, in certain circles, it's almost as if, well, what kind of a Christian are you? You know?
Hmm.
I mean, you should have faith. You should always have faith. How dare you? That kind of thing. But
Hmm.
I don't think that that's really the. You mentioned something that I think is very important in situations like this is how we grow. The Bible makes it very clear that God tests us, you know? And there's a difference between being tempted and testing.
Right.
Satan tempts us,
Yeah. God does
because
not.
he
Right.
wants us to fail. He wants us to fail. But see, God believes in us. And since He believes in us, when these tests do arrive, it's because He wants us to pass the test. So we'll be prepared for the next things within our life.
Mm.
Like what you mentioned about your brother. Your brother being ill. You were a teenager back then. And what do you do? I remember in 2009, as a matter of fact, I had a major episode, health episode in my life, where within 24 hours I I hemorrhaged. I hemorrhaged close to 70% of my blood, you know,
Oh wow.
and it was a moment really of life and death. And I remember how the Lord sovereignly in 2 days, I mean, I had excellent care at the hospital. But I remember how during that time, I just prayed up to the Lord, and I remember telling my wife, I said, "Honey, I'm ready," and she said, "No, no, 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 you can't die." I said, "No, no, no." I said, "I'm ready for whatever God has for me." And it turns out that this was, as I said, in 2009, and it turns out that this was yeah, it was April 16th, if I remember correctly, a Thursday. The doctor comes in, the surgeon comes in and says, "We're going to operate tomorrow. We don't know what's going to happen." Everything that she said to us, my wife and myself, it was from bad to worse. That I could become unconscious, I could become a vegetable, I could even die, etc., etc. And I remember very clearly saying to her, I said, "My wife and I, we believe, we're believers, we're Christians, and we really believe that God can heal." And I guess the doctor was just as desperate as we were, because she didn't have an answer, you know.
Yeah.
And she was very frustrated in the sense that since I was bleeding so much and they were giving me blood transfusions, transfusions I was I was hemorrhaging that also, so they had to operate the next day, but they didn't know exactly what they would find. So she says, "Okay, that's fine, that's okay," and we prayed. And that night, a friend of mine, a pastor friend of mine from Miami, called me, and we had sent out emails, we had sent all sorts of texts and things, and this friend of mine from Miami called me, and as he called me, he prayed for me, and I just thought to myself of the woman with the issue of blood, and we're not talking about that text here, but I remember about the woman with the issue of blood. And I said to my friend, "Thank you for praying." I hung up and I started looking at the biblical text. As I read the text, all of a sudden, I think it's Mark, this same gospel, chapter 5, verse 29, I believe. It says something to the effect that the woman touched Jesus, and she and her affliction had gone. And I just prayed to the Lord. I said, "Lord, I need for you. I'm ready to go if I'm to go now, but I need for you to touch me, just like I know you did it for this woman." And I went to sleep. Next morning, 6 a.m., the surgeon comes in. My wife is in the room. The surgeon, she comes in with her whole medical team, and she says, "We don't know what happened, but you're okay." I mean, I believe God sovereignly touched me at that moment, and I have the medical records to prove all of this. And it's funny because this
Wow.
story, there are
Wow.
the Sadducees, the scribes, religious leaders who sort of mock Jesus and make fun of him. And among the team, the surgeon's team, one of the doctors that came in with her said, "Oh, sometimes the body heals itself," you know. And I didn't think of it at that moment, but I should have. I wish I would have. I felt like saying, "You weren't saying that 24 hours ago."
Right now.
But
Yeah.
anyway, that was a very desperate moment. I cried out to
Wow.
the Lord, and the Lord sovereignly healed me. And my hemoglobin, the numbers were, I was at the point of death, let's put it like that. And the Lord just sovereignly, and 10 days later, I was on a trip on a plane to go to Guatemala and preach the gospel. So again,
Wow.
God
So you were like
hasn't
good,
finished
good.
his
Yeah.
plan. I mean, it was really the hand of God, and that's why this passage means so much to me also. Because I've
Hmm.
seen this, I've
Yeah.
experienced this. It's not something that somebody tells me or a book that was written 2,000 years ago. I experienced that. So,
That's
yeah,
amazing.
Elliot, when we have those
That's
moments,
amazing. Yeah, and
yeah, well,
well, obviously,
yeah,
spoiler alert for how the story ends. Same thing happens. Jesus heals this boy who was having, what is it, convulsions, and then he was throwing himself
Yeah,
into fire
convulsions. Yeah,
and throwing himself, or seizures, some say. I don't
right.
know,
Seizures.
different.
Right. It depends on the translation, but yeah,
Right, and he foams at the mouth, and throws himself into fire and water. So like I've heard people say, well, this wasn't a demon, this was just an illness. I'm like, whatever it was, if you
right.
want to despiritualize it a little bit, that's fine. But like, think whatever it was, Jesus heals him, or Jesus makes him better,
Exactly.
restores his body, and shows power over it. It's just like he did to you, my little brother, and so many people, so many miracles that we've heard of, and we know are true.
And
But like
miracles,
this.
Elliot, you
Mhm.
use the word miracles, and miracles are not something, at least we're of the belief, there was something just for Jesus's day.
Mhm.
Miracles do happen today. There's Dr. Keener, Craig Keener. I don't know if you're familiar with him, but
Yes.
he's written an excellent, excellent book, a short little book. I think it's something like 800 pages, you know, on
Short, yeah.
miracles.
Compared to
Yeah,
the Bible,
little
maybe.
thing. Yeah, exactly. But he's written a book on miracles, and it's fascinating because he's documented so much, so many miracles throughout the world. And we see this throughout history, you know,
Mhm.
how, calling on the name of the Lord. And of course, there's always someone who will ask, well, what if God doesn't heal?
Right.
Well, if God doesn't heal, we're winners also because
Yeah.
we'll be in his presence.
Right.
And I know that's not what sometimes we want to hear as believers. But just like this father, in the midst of his troubles, in the midst of his pain and all the other things, he called on the name of the Lord, and the Lord responded.
Yeah.
And that's what's so encouraging. And I think for our listeners also, for them to know that Jesus does hear, Jesus does listen, he's not distant. Now, sometimes what happens is that we don't, it's not our timing
Yeah.
rather than his timing.
Yeah, and there's
And,
there's
we
there's
wanted,
times where it
yeah,
doesn't make sense, right? And this is where we trust, right? This
yep,
is so to kind of go full circle, we have here, like you said, the Pharisees, which maybe being the intellectuals, being the doctorates at the time,
right,
or even if they weren't religious, right? Or some of them.
right.
Um, and then we have a father here who's saying, "I believe, but help my unbelief." Well, let's start there. What does belief mean? How would you? Because I've heard it
Exactly.
described many different ways. How would you describe faith or belief? In Jesus. What is that? What does that mean?
Well, it
Simple
means so
questions.
much to, yeah. I think, it's funny because the word in the New Testament from the Greek pistis,
Hmm.
you know, it it's normally or many times translated as faith. For example, Hebrews chapter 11, it appears many, many times there. And usually the translations, uh, instead of, well, they translate it as faith. But I would add something to that. I would say it's more trusting faith.
Hmm.
It's a faith, yes, you believe, and faith is something that you don't exercise in a vacuum. Let
Right.
me explain that. That all of a sudden, yeah, I have faith, but it's a trusting faith. Who do you have faith in? What do you trust in? Who do you trust in?
Hmm.
And faith is something that we grow. I think as believers, we grow and we mature. You see, Abraham is called the father of faith, you know, and you look at the life of Abraham, and it's fascinating to see how much and his progression when he finally, did sacrifice or tried to sacrifice, because he really didn't sacrifice, even though we say many times this Isaac was sacrificed. No, he wasn't,
Right.
because but what really did happen there was that he exercised his faith and he was willing and he trusted. And it's curious because the author of Hebrews again reminds us that he believed that God could even raise him from the dead. So faith is something that we exercise, but it's expressed through trust and also through works. That we follow up in that. It's not just words that we say, oh, I have faith in God, and we
Right.
continue forward. It goes beyond word. It's an attitude. It's a growing. And
Yeah.
I think that's That's what the term really helps us to understand that
I've
better.
heard it said um believing allegiance, or something like that, or trust,
Yeah,
allegiance, that's
yeah,
trust. I've heard different people try to articulate it a different way, where you have that connotation where it's not just a mental,
right.
assent of a
Assent.
reality, or an acceptance of something being true, but it's a giving of allegiance, or a trusting, like you say.
Yeah,
So there's so here we have a father who's has that, but says I could use more of it. There's part of me who is still
exactly.
fighting that, and like you said, it's something that grows, like faith, like a mustard seed. A seed grows,
Right.
right? So we have that, but then we have all right. Let's move on to the disciples then.
Okay.
Jesus rebukes them, and then he says for not being able to do it, and then he says because they don't believe, but then he tells them, um, well, this one only comes out with prayer. I know there's some versions that say and fasting, but
Right.
apparently in the original Greek it wasn't there.
Well, it
And
depends on the manuscripts, but
right,
I mean, there are other. Yeah, some people make a big deal about that. Well, this word isn't there in the better manuscripts, etc. But it was prayer. Let's put it like that.
yeah,
Prayer.
right.
Yeah.
So what does prayer have to do with faith? And then why does he rebuke them? I like what you said
Well,
just before you say that, like we're not just putting faith like a power. I have faith, you have faith. It's like faith in what? Faith in myself, faith
exactly.
in it's faith in someone, and it's
Yeah.
Jesus who is the ultimate power. It's Jesus who heals. It's not your faith, right? So
Right.
I know people say we're saved by faith, and I agree, but
Yeah.
it's like we're saved by faith in Jesus. We're not saved by
Right.
faith in my own strength, or in
Exactly.
a machine, or whatever it is. So anyway, what would you say, like?
And the church continues to discuss that. I mean, some great men and women of God,
Hmm.
come more on the side of, and again, we don't have to go into the weeds, but some of them, say faith without works. They'll quote the scripture and say faith without works, because if you have
James.
faith, it has no works, but our works demonstrate and show that we do have faith. So it's
Hmm.
important for us to realize they really go hand in hand. At least that's my perspective. They go
Yeah.
hand in hand. And James, for example, says, "You have faith, the demons have faith also." You know,
Right.
and again, there's that tension between the faith and works. And of
Yeah.
course, somebody will say, "Well, without faith, it's impossible to please God." But I think we need to be a little cautious on that side. It's not an either or, they work together.
Right. Like someone I've heard say it's like the fire, the light and the heat that comes out of fire. Like
Right.
how do you know there's a fire? Because there's light and there's heat. So it's
Exactly.
like you believe, and your life shows that you believe it.
Yeah.
If
Exactly.
I've given this example
Exactly.
to the youth at my church. I told them, if I walk in and I told you I believe I'm a monkey, and I just tell you that, you're like, no, you don't. But if I walk in acting like a monkey for hours, you're gonna be like, oh, Elliot believes he's a monkey. I don't even have to tell you I'm a monkey. My actions show that I've gone cuckoo, and I really believe this. You know what I mean? So
Exactly.
it's it's like you said, evidence of the fruit of.
Yeah.
So I like that.
And
But
they
anyway.
go hand in hand. And that's what I think is so fascinating about this text as we
Hmm.
wind down. It's something that helps not only us as individuals, but also can help other people, whether they're believers or not believers, to see that, it's okay that we question. It's okay that we have doubts. It's okay. We all haven't arrived.
Hmm.
So that's what I find so encouraging about this passage. In
For
the midst
sure.
of all of that, Jesus is there.
Amen. Yeah, and well,
Yeah.
to close out, just to finish that part with the
Yeah.
disciples, he tells them, he rebukes them, like, and then he tells them to pray. Where do you see as a connection there between like
Well,
faith and prayer?
there's a whole bunch of arguments going here. You have the people arguing with the disciples, you have the crowd, you have the scribes mentioned here. So there's a whole bunch, I at the beginning it's funny, I can just imagine if this was a film, a movie. You have all these people making all sorts of noise and everything, and Jesus comes here and says, like, what is going on?
Yeah.
And I think the disciples were also in this process, of the Gospels, the number of times says that they didn't understand Jesus, and it was part of the process. And even when Jesus died, the disciples left him really. I mean, you look at Luke chapter 24 on the road to Emmaus, those two disciples there, and it's like, oh man, Jesus was supposed to do this. He hasn't done it. He died. And, poor us, And then Jesus was with them. Jesus was with them. And even when the women, come back and tell Peter and the other disciples, Jesus is risen from the dead. Oh, come on, ladies. What are you, crazy? They had to go. John had to go. Peter had to go. They saw the empty tomb. And it's like, wow, what's going on? And I think, again, those are questions that the Bible allows us to ask those questions. Mm-hmm. But the thing is, God always has those answers if we're sincere and we open up our heart to Him.
That's good. Well,
so
that's, I guess, all we can get to today.
That's it.
There's a lot more we could touch on. But yeah, thank you, everyone, for joining us. I guess this concludes our second episode. We look forward to our next conversation.
Thank you for listening to the Jesus Table podcast. We pray that these conversations are a blessing for anyone seeking to know who Jesus is and for those seeking to know Him even more.